May it please the court. Life is not a game. Fantasy is not reality. And that's what Hayden Durand failed to teach her daughter. That real-world actions have real-world consequences. That real guns can kill people. And it's because of this that Sydney Park is dead. Because Hayden Durand failed to teach her daughter life is not a game. Now, make no mistake, Jessie Durand is not a bad kid. Jessie had normal 11-year-old interests for a normal 11-year-old girl. And in the right context, with the right supervision, this wouldn't be an issue. When Jessie Durand started taking the behavior from those games and translating it to the real world, all Hayden Durand needed to do was step in, explain why that wasn't appropriate, why that fantasy behavior didn't work in the real world. But Hayden Durand did nothing. When Jessie Durand was violent at school, it wasn't out of malicious desire. It was just lack of understanding what was and wasn't appropriate. And all Hayden needed to do was step in, be a parent, set consequences. But instead, Hayden stepped back and let Jessie continue on a dark path, failing to understand that her actions had drastic consequences for those around her. And even on the morning of August 18th, it wasn't too late. Hayden still could have stepped up, could have put her daughter and her daughter's friend in front of herself, could have taken that day off work, could have found an alternative babysitter, could have done something, anything. But Hayden Durand went about business as usual, and Sydney Park was shot and killed. And we're the plaintiffs in today's case, and what that means is we have a burden. We have to prove our case by a preponderance of the evidence. And what that means is we need to show you our claims are true, that are more likely than not to be true. All we need is 50% of the evidence and a hair, nothing more. And we're pursuing a claim of negligent parental supervision. And under the law of Midlands, that has 4 parts: duty, breach, cause, and damages. Now, Hayden Durand herself has conceded that she had a parental duty to take responsibility for her daughter, and that there were damages from this case. We don't have to prove those. All we're proving, all we need to prove, are those middle 2 components, breach and cause. And we've shown you that Hayden Durand breached her parental duty. Hayden Durand knew, or should have known, that her daughter posed a significant risk. Hayden Durand saw from the drawing that her daughter had an obsession with firearms. Hayden Durand even wrote in an email to a friend, wrote about her daughter's violent behavior, how it was translating into the real world. But at the end of that email, Hayden Durand said, "I know Jessie is a good kid and would never hurt anyone." Hayden Durand was convinced that her daughter was not a threat, that there was nothing wrong. And Hayden Durand failed to properly address her daughter's behavior, to make her daughter understand that, unlike in games, life has consequences. When her daughter hurt another child at school, Hayden Durand did nothing. We're not asking Hayden Durand to rush her child to a psychologist of every little thing, but Hayden Durand has to take reasonable precautions. And what reasonable parent does nothing when their child physically hurts another child? And then a few weeks later, when it happens again, what reasonable parent does nothing? Is it reasonable to wait until your child has hurt somebody else 3 separate times before you think any consequences are necessary at all? And even on the evening of August 17th, when Hayden found out that Jessie wanted to see this gun, knew there was a gun, Hayden tried to talk to Jessie about it. But at the end of that conversation, Jessie said, "I know. That's why I want to see a real gun." Because Jessie Durand didn't understand that real guns have real consequences. Hayden knew that there was a threat. Hayden knew that there was a danger and didn't properly address it. And that breach of parental duty was the direct and proximate cause of Sidney Park's death. But for Hayden Durand's actions and Hayden Durand's inactions, Sidney Park would still be alive. Because Jules Sebastian told you that when Jesse Durand went over there that morning and they were playing with the gun, there was only one set of fingerprints on that gun. And there's only one person in the world that those prints could belong to. That's Jesse Durand. Jesse Durand put the bullets in the gun. Jesse Durand lifted his arm and pulled the trigger. Not because she wanted to hurt Sidney, but because she didn't understand that Sidney wouldn't just come back again. She couldn't draw that line between fantasy and reality. And Hayden Durand knew that Jesse couldn't make that distinction. Hayden Durand knew that Jesse wanted to see a gun, that there was a gun at the Parks' home, and that Jesse had a history of violence. And yet Hayden Durand made the decision to leave her daughter unsupervised anyway. Now, in a few moments, opposing counsel is going to come in front of you and try to tell you that Andy Park's also at fault here. Andy Park is responsible for Sidney's death. But they'll leave out a very important distinction. Hayden Durand knew things that Andy didn't. Hayden Durand knew the full extent of Jesse's obsession with guns. Andy didn't know that. Hayden Durand knew that her daughter had a history of physical violence. Andy didn't know that. Andy didn't know because Hayden never told her. And that is the difference in today's case. That is the difference between Andy Park and Hayden Durand, and that was the difference between life and death for Sidney Park. And that is why you must find Hayden Durand liable for Sidney Park's death. Because life is not a game. And when Hayden Durand failed to teach that to her daughter, she signed Sidney's death warrant. That is why you must find Hayden Durand liable for the death of Sidney. Thank you.
Defense?
Yes, Your Honor. Maisha Ishmael, may I proceed?
You may.
Your Honor,